Good morning, and thank you very much for coming. You can come up. I promise I won't spit. We won't pick on the people in the front. People in the back I will pick on. I'm just kidding. So we're going to talk about product ownership. Pretty important topic. Please have lots of questions because it'll make it more interactive. It'll make it a lot more fun. So I'm going to introduce our three panelists. I've got Kevin Brennan, a BA hero of mine. Kent McDonald, another hero of mine. And Emily Midgley, yet another hero. Heroine, sorry. So, Kevin, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, because you know more about yourself than obviously I will.
Yeah, but I don't like talking about myself. Anyway, hi, I'm Kevin Brennan. So I'm the person responsible for the business analysis body of knowledge. So if you've been studying for an exam, I'm sorry. I apologize. So in my day job, I do product management consulting. I have worked on Scrum teams for both software and non-software applications, and I guess that's why I'm here. Kent.
Thanks. Again, my name is Kent McDonald. I am currently working as a delivery lead with the team rebuilding a 20-year-old system. In my past, I have done product ownership, coach teams, been a BA, wore several hats, and I'm excited to be here today.
Hey, I'm Emily Midgley. I'm a business analyst, product owner coach, agile coach. Lately, I've been helping change an organization to try to restructure to be more product focused. But I work internally. I've worked at Progressive Insurance for 17 years now, and most of that time as a BA of some form.
Wow. So if you have any questions, just put up your hand, and I will try to run with a mic to you. First question is, and it's completely unscripted, so I didn't even know what the question was until just now, but all three of you have said, I had a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. Is product ownership the next iteration of where we're going, or is it just an iteration?
I would say an iteration. It is where I think a lot of the software-focused BA work is going, but there's going to be other kinds of BA roles out there. There's still a space for process improvement. There's a space for business architecture. I think there's no one job that is going to be exactly what a BA does down the road.
Kent, you're contemplating?
I think product ownership is and is not an iteration, and here's why. I think it is part of the next iteration where folks in the BA community should be heading to be thinking more from a product standpoint. The reason I say it's not is because product ownership is only a bit of it. So there's three kind of roles that I see get mixed into this whole product people thing. There's product management type stuff where you're working with customers and figuring out the market. There's business analysis where you're figuring out where these business processes and rules and things that how the business works. Product ownership, basically what it comes down to is how am I working well with the team. Mm-hmm. That's frankly what is the focus of it in Scrum. Now, some organizations have taken product ownership and thrown that label on someone in the business who's got 20 other things going on. And said, hey, you need to go now and make decisions and spend a lot of time with the team that you don't have time to do. Have fun. So it's kind of one of those things that it's pointing more towards, yes, we're going to be in a position where we can make more decisions, but I don't know that it is certainly the only path.
Mm-hmm.
Emily, do you have any comments?
I think just kind of reiterating that stuff, like product ownership, it's a thing, it's kind of a small thing, and in the grand scheme of things, probably all of you can relate to, yeah, I'm a BA and I'm interested in this piece. What's really interesting to me, and I think you guys are there too, is I'm looking a lot more at just product stuff. So product management is really interesting to me now and lately, and your BA skills can help build upon that, but it's kind of facing outward a lot more than what we have been focusing on traditionally in the BA space.
Fantastic answers. So I'm clearly not the smartest person on this stage. What would you say is the definition of product ownership, and what's the difference between product ownership and product management? I know, Kevin, you and I talked a little bit about this Monday or Tuesday. Why don't you kick us off?
So, Kent and Emily actually kind of covered part of that already. Product ownership is a relationship with the development team. It's about organizing and prioritizing and making sure that the development team is building the most valuable thing that they can work on at any given time. That fundamentally is what product ownership is about.
Okay, so I got to cut you off there. Isn't that what I always do as a BA? Don't I already have that relationship with my development team?
Are you making the decision about what's the most important thing for them to work on at any given time, at any given moment, what the next piece of software they should be building right now is?
A lot of my career, yes, but okay.
Because if you are, then yeah, it is what you're already doing. But a lot of BAs aren't. A lot of BAs are working in environments where, you put together a set of requirements, you kind of prioritize them, and the development team goes off and they figure out which piece they're going to build in which order, or the project manager comes along and tells them which piece to build in which order, and then it doesn't work, and they cut scope, The product owner is instead working with the team to do a rapid iteration of piece by piece by piece and incrementally build out the product. Now, to answer the rest of your question, a product manager is somebody who's going out there and looking at the market and figuring out what the product needs to do in order to be successful in the market. And that's a much longer term role where you have to look at the strategy of the product and long-term development of the product and what competitors are doing. And I feel like I've talked enough now and I should turn it over to these two. For their opinions.
So I'm thinking in a very brief statement. So I'm thinking about Melissa Perry. So she's fantastic in the product space. She has a great book called Escaping the Build Trap. And if y'all read it, you'll find yourself like cheering and getting excited because you have lived her life. But what she says about product ownership and product management is that product ownership is a role, product management is a job.
A job. Wow.
A job. It could be a job title. Product owner is, the role you play on the team. I'm the decision maker. I'm figuring out the most important thing to work on. And the key, like if you're get to be a true product owner, like Kevin said, is I get to make that decision and the team will respect it and the rest of the organization will respect it. For a lot of us, it probably hasn't always been that case. But as a product manager, that is your job. And the organization recognizes it and respects it. And product ownership is a Scrum thing, defined by Scrum, but understood by a lot of people. I think product management makes it a little bit more official.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to pick on you for a second here. If product management is a job and product ownership is wow.
It's tough, yeah.
Is a role, conceivably you could do both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, presumably you could do both. Yeah.
Okay, so in my view, and perhaps, as I said, I'm not the smartest person on this stage by far. In my view, the product owner typically controls the purses, controls the money. Is that the case?
Not necessarily, no.
No. Okay, well then perhaps my view of product ownership has changed. So how do you, as a product owner, how do you measure success?
It's about, are you bringing value to the users? Usually we're focusing on, did we provide value? Thinking about Agile and Scrum, there is very little focus on what that actually means. So with all of the focus in the last several years on Agile and Scrum, and we've got to provide customer value, there's no guidance at all in the Agile world about what that actually is. The cool part about product management is that that's the whole thing. How are we doing useful things? How do we know that this is actually providing some kind of goodness to the customer or completing their job for them or making their life easier? So product management provides lots of techniques and ways to go about doing that. And with the job of product manager, you also get to hold the purse strings and you're actually responsible for making sure the product makes money or the startup stays afloat. You guys know lots.
So I'm going to describe how you describe success as a product owner by saying how you don't describe success.
Cool.
Well, sometimes you need to know what it isn't to understand what it is.
So a lot of teams are used to describing success based on, did we finish X thing on time, on budget? The typical iron triangle project management things. And that is a very output-focused measure of, hey, were we successful? and you can be successful from an output standpoint and completely miss the boat on what you're trying to accomplish. So product ownership, product management, the product thinking tends to look at things from, did we solve the problem we were trying to solve, otherwise as an outcome. As an example, the effort I'm working on right now, the project that was handed to us was, we need you to rebuild this 20-year-old application. So a lot of people would say, oh, we'll be successful when we have rebuilt this 20-year-old application. The trouble is, without having an understanding of why we're rebuilding that 20-year-old application, we're not quite sure if we're heading down the right path. And we could very easily go past the timeline because we're going to just try and rebuild everything that the old wing has in it, even though not all that's useful. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, let's understand why we're rebuilding it, and it's basically to reduce manual processes that are involved in the process today. It's to reduce the cost of errors, and it's to build something that can be much more easily maintained. So those are measures of success, and there also are ways of determining along the way, if we're trying to figure out should we do this particular feature or not, well, will it help us do one of those three things? If not, we're not going to do it. We're not going to put that back in the system. So you measure success based on, did you deliver the outcomes you set out to do?
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think? Do you have any questions? Are you still sleeping? Coffee hasn't kicked in? All right, so.
There is a question.
That's right?
There's a question. Somebody, yes.
So it's too late.
We have a question.
I feel like Vanna White.
So as a product owner, right, you're trying to get your development team to deliver the most valuable things from your backlog and your priority list. But also that development team is responsible for delivering things like, you know, whether it's patching systems or upgrading, things that we might consider tech debt, right? So how do you balance that between delivering value, i.e., you know, either making more money or time saved versus the other things that need to get done, that sort of housekeeping, lights on type of stuff?
So I think I heard the question was, how do you balance the do things to make money versus keeping the lights on? Is that basically?
Yeah, and prioritizing those things. And
all right.
Any
So
sort of,
one of the things that, one of the definitions of, or ways of thinking about value that I find particularly helpful is thinking of, you're delivering business value or customer value, well, particularly business value, when you help the business make progress towards its goals, right? And so things like technical debt and other kinds of problems represent obstacles that need to be addressed in order for the team to make progress. And in that situation, what you have to think as a product owner is, if we keep building features and pumping out features, how much are we going to be slowed down by these problems that we have? How much impact is that going to have on my team's ability to deliver value? And if we just step back and clean them up, will we not then be able to do more faster once we've addressed that obstacle that's keeping us from performing?
Right, yeah, if you have trouble trying to get the tech debt paid down, try talking with the team and the product owner, product manager, whoever it is, to say, okay, if we don't fix this thing, is that going to inhibit our ability to deliver things quickly? And that will often get their attention. Or try to put it in terms of, okay, how is this making things more difficult for our users? Or is this causing problems with the business? Are we having longer time on the phone? Like if you're a customer service representative, if we just automated something for them, how much time would that save? So see if you can put it in terms of impact to the customer, but then also impact to ability to deliver quickly.
So in the effort that I'm working on right now, we have the unique advantage of not starting out with any technical debt because we're building the thing from scratch, although we're rebuilding an existing system. But yet we've somehow managed to find a way to create technical debt anyway, which
it always happens.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we're constantly having this balancing act to say, well, we want to keep making progress and get stuff out there to get feedback from the people that are going to be using this and to get an understanding, are we still heading in the right direction? And at the same time, as Kevin mentioned, doing things to make sure we're able to build things quickly. So what usually ends up happening is we have several pieces of functionality that are all kind of the same thing. So we do the first one, takes a while, And in the midst of doing that, the team realizes, oh, well, we could have made this thing common and we could spread it across everything else. We said, that's great. Note that we want to make it common and apply it to all the other things. Push that off on the backlog. They love it when I say that. And then we'll tackle it later because there might be some other things we need to get through first, either to validate that we have some assumptions we need to make sure are true. We've got some risks we got to address, or we need to get something additional out there to get some more feedback on it. So it's an ever-increasing thing to say, okay, at this point in time, which is more important, this new feature to get feedback or to get it out in the market, or, yeah, now it's time to help us go faster in the future by implementing this thing that can be common across a lot of different pieces of functionality.
Okay, so I'm a traditional BA. How do I get into project ownership? What's the path? Do I need to take courses? Do I need to just jump in? How do I get there?
So I think a lot of it, your organization has to be ready for that. I think so the organization I'm at, we started doing Agile, and it turns out our version of Agile was just building and testing closer together. But there are lots and lots of other things in the value stream that could have been Agile, and we're still trying to make Agile. So just be aware of that if you start on that journey. It's a long journey, and there are lots and lots of things to turn around and make happen more quickly. So in the absence of your organization being ready for it, you can still go learn about it and try to get your backlog in order, get your stakeholders to understand that a late change in requirements is a competitive advantage. So I think like we've all heard that from Mary. So you can do some things on your own. You can learn about some techniques, some user stories, user story mapping, but just try to get to the why in a lot of things. So the why is not to rebuild the 20-year-old system exactly as it is today. The why is for us to be able to respond to change. It's to be able to automate some things that aren't currently there. So ask why, work on yourself, and hopefully the organization will start to get there.
Do you have any thoughts on this one, Kevin?
No, my problem actually is that the way I found out about it was I got told, hey, you're on an Agile team, figure it out.
Good luck.
This was back in 2001 when Agile wasn't really a thing. So they didn't even tell me it was Agile. They just said, this is how we're working, and you need to do something in 2 weeks. And by the way, the last person we hired to do this, they failed and we let them go. So, we have confidence in you. And I good luck. Okay, good luck. Yeah. But 2 weeks later, I sat down, I came up with a couple of use cases, test cases around them, and we went into the first iteration and we built that, and it kept going from there.
Nice.
I think that the road to product ownership is kind of like the road to business analysis. If I were to ask each one of you out in the audience how you got into being business analysts, you probably have as many different stories as there are people sitting out there. I'm seeing some heads nod. It's the same thing. So my road to product ownership was I had a really good friend that called me up and said, hey, the Agile Alliance is wanting to redo their submission system. I think you'd be a great product owner because you're such a good business analyst. So, okay. So yeah, it had a little bit of help to have someone that kind of knew the skill sets. The thing that I think it is when you find yourself in a situation where you're working with a designated product owner that's sitting in the area of the organization that you're doing the work for, chances are that person is going to be not very available because they've probably got a real job, not a real job, a different job. Freudian slip. Where they've got other day-to-day responsibilities, and so maybe you might be able to get them to make a decision here and there and attend a few reviews. So that's a great place to start stepping in. Have a discussion with that person to say, let's figure out how far along the way are you comfortable with me making decisions versus where do you need to be brought in? And then stand out there and make those decisions, and expect once in a while you might get countermanded. And if you do, great, go back and retrospect with that individual. So the situation I'm in right now, I'm not technically the product owner of the tool we're building. However, I'm making probably 90% of the decisions about what comes next. So from a feature level, I'm talking with Chad, who is the explicitly identified product owner. But everything underneath that, I'm making those decisions, because if we had to wait for Chad, we'd still be working on the first piece of functionality. Because he's got, in fact, he switched jobs halfway through the project, and he's got a lot of other things on his plate. So it's a matter of having that trust with the person that is the ultimate decision maker and figuring out where do the responsibilities lie. And I think that's helpful on all efforts to really figure out who should be making which types of decisions.
Yeah,
Chad
and
left
actually,
behind.
Ken, my first experience was very similar to yours with Chad. We had a VP at the client, and we were working through a whole set of business transactions that we had to automate. And the VP would come in about once or twice a month and decide which transaction he wanted to prioritize. And that was the sum total of his input. And then from the rest of that, it was up to me to figure it out and do that work.
Wow, so based on what you've just said, it sounds like I've been a product owner without the title for many years. Because it used to be as a BA, what I would do is not being able to wait for decisions to be made. I would make decisions, not some of the heavy decisions, of course, but I'd make a lot of decisions in regard to the product. So product ownership isn't new then.
No, so the dirty little secret about product owner and Scrum Master is that when Ken Schwaber was creating Scrum to market it back in the 90s, he wanted to come up with these silly titles to differentiate them from what roles are typically on projects at the time: business analyst, project manager, or product manager in the case of product owner. So he created these things to show how different it was. But the interesting thing is that, as it's turned out, a lot of project managers have miraculously become Scrum Masters. And there is a great confusion back to our first questions about, well, what's the difference between product owner and product manager? And depending on what world you come from, you have different perspectives on which one supersedes the other. So if you're someone coming strictly from an agile environment, they say, oh, well, it's product owner because they're the owner. And so the product managers work for the product owner. And the product managers are saying, that's bunk. I mean, we're the ones that are going out talking to customers. We're the ones going out understanding the market. We're the ones figuring out what problems we're trying to solve. All the product owners are supposed to do is be backlog jockeys. So it's important that when you're talking about those titles and roles to understand what the context is of the people that you're talking to.
So I've got to say, it's nice to have an environment where we have people working for us. The perception is that people work for us rather than we work for someone else. Having been a VA for many, many years, when I first started, I was asked to get coffee and book meetings and whatnot, because that's what business analysts did. We were just junior PMs. Is that any correlation between that in business analysis, or am I just missing things up here?
Well, I hear that a lot. Honestly, during my career as a BA, I got thrown into that product owner type role or product owner type attitude, even on non-agile teams, pretty early on. I would say within a year or two, I was being asked to make a lot of decisions about what would get built and how it would get built and how it would work, and being sent out to the business to understand what they needed and not simply translate and write down what they told me, but actually figure out what should be built in order to support their business process. So if that's the kind of thing you do as a BA, it's not going to be a huge jump to be a product owner, I think.
I think a lot of that comes down to acting like you've been there. So if I reflect back on all of the explicitly BA roles that I've been in, and a lot of those I've been a so BA/project manager. I was usually the first person working on the effort. So I was having to do a lot of the figuring out what is this thing really all about. And so it never got to the point where I was being asked to go get coffee or make copies or things of that nature. I was always the one that had kind of the most background knowledge on it. So I was always kind of saying, hey, here's what we got to do in order to solve this problem. So that helps not getting stuck into the other scenario.
That's awesome. So IIBA is coming out with a new guide to product ownership and a new certification. What's your opinions on that? How's that for a grenade?
Well, we haven't seen it yet.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
So
What's in it?
It's hard to have an opinion. I mean, I think that there's a lot of people that struggle with the role. So here's what I would say. One of the problems I have with a lot of existing product owner material and content is that it is so focused on the interaction with the development team. And that's important, but when you read about the product owner role, in a lot of cases, it's like the backlog fairy comes along and waves a magic wand, and poof, you have a backlog. And somehow the product owner sits there and prioritizes that and figures out what the team should do. And that's not the reality of how any kind of product owner gets to operate. Whether you're working on an external product, that's going out to the market, or you're working with internal teams, and I hate the word internal products, but we'll use it for purposes of this discussion. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen in order to figure out what needs to be built. And so I think there's a lot of value in filling that gap, especially on the internal side. I think there's a better support for product managers, for external products, how to get to that end. But internally, nobody's really talking about that, and I think that that's a real gap in the needs of professionals.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think all three of us have mentioned that, so product ownership, that is a construct from Scrum, which relates to Agile, but both, Agile, Scrum, even SAFe are pretty silent on what is it that we're actually building, and does it even matter? So the Iron Triangle, I don't care what you're building and how fast you're getting it out if it's a bunch of crap that nobody uses. So what we really need is, how do we know that we're building something valuable? Yeah.
So to be fair, you did throw the word certification in there.
Yeah.
And I do have certain views on certifications. I'll just leave it at this, is that if you're thinking of doing a certification, it's very important for you to understand why you're getting it and understand what it is certifying. So leave that at that. From a standpoint of, and you mentioned the idea of internal products, one of the things that I think it's important that is not brought out that much is, as you mentioned, for people working on products that you're selling out, there is a great deal of information about how to go out and understand the market, how to deal with that complexity of figuring out what the heck are these customers even doing or thinking. What you don't hear a lot about is that when you're working on something inside your organization, you still got to worry about that kind of stuff. You still got to worry about how is what I'm doing ultimately going to impact our organization, and how our organization interacts with our real customers, the people that pay us money for things. So that's why I thought it was great that the opening keynote yesterday was on customer experience. I was kind of wondering when he kept saying customers, who people were thinking of. Were people thinking of, oh, that's Bob in accounting, and that was not a plug for account temps, that I'm doing something for, or is it actually the customers that buy our stuff? I think he was talking about the people that buy our stuff. And I think it's important, even if you're working on a CRM would be a bad example because you are worried about customers there. Even if you're worried about working on an HR system, or you're working on an accounting system, or you're working on any variety of things that are used inside your organization, somewhere along the line there is some impact to your customers. So you got to at least have that in mind to help you make decisions about, does it make sense for us to get really extravagant with our time tracking, as an example, when we should probably be spending more effort on making sure that the experience, our customers, when they interact with us, is better. Yeah, so it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, actually, Ken, you have a great example of that in one of the books you wrote, Stand Back and Deliver. I remember it, and it was sort of like so would we go out to our customers and put on the billboard that we have the best time tracking system in the world? Would that get more people coming to our organization and buying our stuff? And obviously the answer is no, right?
That's awesome. I think we have a question here.
Good morning. Good morning. My question is, I currently have a team of business analysts, and we're going through an org change. and I'm going to be taking on the product owners, are going to be moving to me from a functional management perspective. And my concern is, how do I stay in alignment with the strategic vision of the product managers so my product owners are not, delivering or going after something that isn't part of the strategic vision? Any thoughts or recommendations on how I would keep those two in sync?
So you're, I'm gonna answer based on how I interpreted your question, and you can tell me if I'm completely off base. So it sounds like you're wondering, how do I make sure that the folks on my team are making decisions that are in alignment with where the organization is headed as a whole? Is that kind of what you were talking about?
Because functionally, they're going to have different management. So product owners are being reporting through here, and product managers are reporting through here.
Okay.
But how do product owners and product managers stay connected?
Stay connected. So part of it is that you probably want to get to be very friendly with the person that's managing the other folks that you're not, and then make sure that those people are joined at the hip, and when they're working on the same product. And in fact, if you look at, there's a lot of people in the product management space that have explored, is it good or not to have separate product managers and separate product owners? And a lot of people will say no, because that opens up a lot of opportunities for miscommunication. The flip side to that is you get an organization large enough and you gotta split it up somehow, and this seems to be a good way to do it. So the trick there is to say, what are all the opportunities for those two people to miscommunicate and get ahead of it? So again, as I mentioned before, the whole decision responsibility, that's a good conversation to have fairly early on while they're still friends, to say, which decisions am I going to make, which decisions are you going to make, and how are we going to stay in sync with everything, and how do we make sure that the team doesn't look at us like parents where we're going to play mom off of dad, right? Oh, I didn't like the answer the product owner gave me, I'm going to go and check with the product manager and see what they say. So it's kind of getting ahead of all the opportunities for communication problems. How can we get ahead of it?
Yeah, and as much as you can, have them be joined at the hip, make friends with their manager, the product manager, and just logistically, as much as they can physically be together, that's a really great thing too. So we talk about that a lot with Agile and Scrum. Co-located teams are a good thing. Co-located POs and PMs also good too, because just the things that you overhear and the conversations that are happening, you want to have everyone there, so it's not like, oh gosh, now we got to go talk to the PM product manager and see what they think about it. So communication is good, and Kent has a great white paper that has different models of POs and PMs and things to look out for. But yeah, key is communication.
Awesome. So we have another question.
Hey there. Are there any statistics on which teams are more successful, the ones that have product owners solely from the customer operations, or the ones that have IT analysts as the product owners, or even a mix of both with IT analysts serving as a proxy?
So as it just so happened, I thought I saw Angela walk in here.
She's in
there. She is. There's a survey that was described last night that covered some of that, although I don't know if you looked so much at the product owner-ish side of stuff.
Some of it. I mean, it just depends. Like, we look at things like product visioning and metrics and how we measure and align the role of the product owner and BA and those models and which models work the best. And so there's some data that we published yesterday on that.
So there was a state of agile analysis report, and there might still be some cards floating around there with the URL for it. I can tell you from my own experience that if you have product owners coming from functional units, so say you're doing just hypothetically speaking, a software package to price the input for production. Bringing someone as the product owner from that organization that uses that might be effective if they are actually serious about spending the time they need to be a product owner. But you don't often see that happen. Usually they're, again, trying to do that along with 17 other things that they already didn't have time to do. And so just by the fact that they're not able to fulfill the expectations of that role effectively, it causes some issues. The other trouble is if you don't back them up with someone that has a lot of experience with diving in and understanding business process and business rules, the team's going to flounder because they're not going to have a lot of great direction. But that's more speaking from experience more so than statistics.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is, in my experience working with all kinds of companies undergoing change, it's very rare that somebody comes in as an SME, which this person would be basically, right, starting off coming in as a product owner SME, they often do not have the analytical skills and breadth of experience in order to figure out what the product should actually be. So they will tend to do it the way they do it, which may not be the way the rest of their team does it. Whenever I bring people in for a workshop and you bring in, 5 people to talk about how a business process works, you get 7 different versions of the process. And there's always a moment where the manager sits there in horror as the team describes some workaround that they do every day. So, the thing is that one way or another, somebody who's doing the product owner role is going to, for internal stuff, is going to have to work through those kinds of challenges. Mm-hmm. And the person is going to have to be somebody who can do that.
Awesome. We have another question here.
Good morning. I've heard with product management a few times that you shouldn't keep a backlog. Just your thoughts on that, and if you're pro-backlog, who owns that? The product management side or more the development side?
So I was at a product management conference in Cleveland in September, and one of the speakers was, I just lost his name, the guy from Basecamp, Jason Fried. And he is famous for coming up with all of these great ways that they work and explaining, yeah, we don't do backlogs, we don't do forward plans, we just do things in 6-week cycles. And the way he describes it sounds great. And there are people taking notes and thinking, oh yeah, that's wonderful. And then one thing that I always encourage people to think about when they hear that is let's look at Jason Fried's context when he says that. So he's got a team of his entire company is 60 people. They're mostly remote. They've got a single product, although they've kind of expanded that now. And so it probably does work for them. It may not necessarily work in larger organizations where, if for no other reason, you've got a lot of other people who are curious about what you're doing next, right? So if you can get by without having a backlog, and I certainly would not suggest you have a fully fleshed out backlog that's got 10,000 items in it because that becomes a management nightmare. But it is often helpful to creatively connect a very high-level, outcome-focused roadmap along with a backlog of here's the most recent things that we're working on. The other advantage of having the backlog is you can always use that as an excuse when someone asks you for some really strange thing. Say, oh yeah, we'll put it on the backlog. Except then sometimes people go, oh, backlog means stuff you're never going to do, right? Yeah. So it's one of those things is I'd encourage you when you hear that advice is to say, that's great. What context are you doing that in? And why is it working in that context? And would that work here? And experiment, see if it works there or not. My experience has been is in larger organizations, people tend to be curious about what's going on, and they start to get nervous if there's not this thing underneath there saying, here's what we're doing next. They go, does this team know what they're doing? And often they do, but it's just the whole visibility into stuff.
Yeah, it can be not only do they know what they're doing, but wow, they don't have anything else coming up. Why don't we think about redeploying that team somewhere else? So I could see in specific context that might not work out really well.
And I said all that just to avoid saying it depends.
Which it kind of does, yeah.
All right, one more question.
This may be a loaded question, but can your product owner be too involved? Like we work on agile teams, and we're supposed to be self-organized. So can the product owner be too involved in that self-organized team?
It's always possible to be too involved or micromanage or what have you. I mean, I cannot imagine a situation where it would be impossible for that to be the case, right? If you're, the product, you can have a product owner who's sitting there and telling people, no, that's not how you indent your code, right? So obviously the answer is yes. It's kind of a question of, are you getting in the way of the team? And I think it's very hard to say, give an answer that's better than it depends. Different teams are going to be at different levels of maturity or understanding of the product, and how involved the product owner needs to be is going to depend on that team. I'm quite sure there are teams out there that are at the level of, tell me what you want out of our next sprint or iteration, and go away and let us go and talk to the users and figure it out, all the way from teams that want a fair set of directions and kind of some product owner to come in and give them this is what we want, this is what the wireframes look like, this is what, the business rules are, and so on and so forth. So I think it really depends on where your team is.
Mm-hmm. And I have seen product owners say, okay, we need a story card for an API that does this, and okay, that would, I think, be too involved, because as a product owner, you've got to balance making sure the team understands the vision, but also looking outward to see how effective it is. So if they're too involved with the team stuff, are they paying attention to the why and the does this even matter? Are the customers paying attention? Are they getting anything out of it? So balance in that way is really key.
I have no doubt that the team I'm working with right now, at several times in the course since we've been working since March, has thought that I've been way too involved. It becomes a matter of a give and take with the team to understand how do we best work with each other. So when I started off working with this team, it was establishing some agreements from a standpoint of like a definition of ready. How much information do you need to have about a backlog item before you start working on it? And then we've iterated on that, because there were some things where I wasn't being, I thought I was being specific enough, but some of the team members were choosing just not to bother reading the story, which, hey, it's all good. To how I work with the UX person on the team, and remembering that when you go in to a session with a UX person and they have a prototype, the best thing for a business-minded PO to do is just shut up and listen. Because they're actually just putting the prototype in front of the users and say, how would you use this? And the last thing you need is the PO to be sitting there leading the witness, because what you're trying to do is figure out how are they instinctively going to use it. So that took me a couple sessions to figure that one out. But it's a give and take, and hopefully you have a good enough relationship with your team that they'll tell you when you're being too obnoxious.
Or even a little obnoxious.
Just a little? So one of the things that IIB is doing is we're doing our annual salary survey where we can amass some more data on this point, including how we can get into, not how we can get into product ownership, but how many of us are in product ownership, what's going on with that. So watch your email if you haven't already got it, that we will be launching that, so that'd be great information that we could get. I want one more question. We've got about 5 minutes left. What would you say is the one thing that everyone should take away from this? What would be your one key success factor, I guess?
So if you want to be a product owner, again, I'm hitting this really hard. Yes, you can totally be a product owner. That means you're making decisions, but take some time to figure out, are these the right decisions? Are we building the right things? And be sure to have the team build in some measures, talk about how do we know whether this was the right thing, how do we know that it made a difference, and then pay attention to those results and be humble enough to acknowledge if those results don't pan out the way that you thought they would, that you might need to go in this direction instead and try something else. So pay attention to did it actually make a difference, and not only did we get it out the door.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing about this kind of role, and it actually ties back to the lesson I had to learn, and I'm probably still learning about managing people, which is that you have to figure out what your team needs and try and deliver that. And that means that, as a product owner, as any kind of leader, what your role is going to depend on them. Your job is to help them get to the result, to get to the outcome that you're looking for, and you have to adapt your style of working to what it is that is going to produce value. So that means, the other part of that is that means you have to have a good understanding of what value means in your context. What is business value to your company? What is going to produce that? And then how do you help your team actually build something that increases that?
So I think the one thing that I would add to that is that all of the analysis techniques that you all know, one of the things that they do, whether you maybe realize it or not, is that they are phenomenal at building a shared understanding about the problem you're trying to solve and the solution you're trying to use to get there with your team. So as you go into being a product owner, don't think that you're not still going to do analysis. In fact, you're probably going to be doing it more effectively now because you're going to be using it with the goal in mind of making sure everybody understands what it is you're working on and moving forward. So it really is trying to keep everyone on the same page. And one other hint is that if you hear people say they're on the same page, usually that means they're not. So that's usually a good sign to say, okay, we need to stand at a whiteboard and talk through this more. So look for ways to build shared understanding as a product owner.
Fantastic. So I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Kent. Thank you. I was going to say Kemily because it's KKE.
Yeah.
It doesn't work, but thank you, Emily, as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.